everybody. Hello to those of you who have wandered into our sacred hall. Did you know this was called the Sacred Hall? When we couldn't build the sanctuary, and the services had to be here, and the ark is behind there, we turned this from the social hall to the Sacred Hall, and there it is, henceforth and forever, the Sacred Hall. So welcome those of you who've wandered in the Sacred Hall, and those of you who are on Zoom land. We're happy to have you here. We'll be here for about an hour or so don't look at your watch, settle in. And I'm going to introduce Dr. Zola and then offer a few remarks and then vacate the moment. That's the best
I'm a graduate of Michigan.
And there are, Missy, thank you for standing at the door, Rabbi Fenster. There are seats in the front, so we don't need to add seats in the back. There are plenty of seats up here. It's a very long introduction, and I'm only going to read highlights. Dr. Zola, Gary, is the executive director of the Jacob Rader Marcus Center of the American Jewish Archives and the Edward M. Ackerman Family Distinguished Professor of the American Jewish Experience and Reform Jewish History at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. He was ordained at HUC and received his PhD at HUC. He has grown the archives into truly a world-renowned diamond of Jewish history that is modern and filled with technology, but also has become the sacred container for everything that we care about and more. He is a historian that specializes in 19th century American Judaism. President Barack Obama appointed him on 3 separate times to serve on the U.S. Commission for the Preservation of America's Jewish Heritage Abroad. He has become the first American Jewish historian to receive an appointment to the Academic Advisory Council of the congressionally recognized Abraham Lincoln Bicentennial Commission. He has received many awards: the Beacon of Light Humanitarian Award, Distinguished Service Award, Martin Luther King Jr. Legacy Award, Bishop Herbert Thompson Jr. Outstanding Humanitarian Award. And that's just pieces of what published many volumes, many articles. And as we always hope and love, Steph, his wife, is here. The two of them truly a partnership, and I'm going to talk about the importance of a partnership in just a second in my own personal remarks, Steph. But I know that this is nothing without the support at home. And any of us who have stepped into that light understand that. And we're just glad you're home again here and that you're with us. But this is how I know him as we pass through school together in our 4 years at Cincinnati. Gary is kind, gallant, interested, and interesting. And he has made his own mark in Jewish history through his brilliance and his passion and his dedication. Now permit me just to digress for a second with a few remarks of my own. In 1978, Sandra Henry and Emily Tates wrote a book called Written Out of History, Our Jewish Foremothers, 1978. And all of us looked at the title of that book and we said, oh my God, we have totally been written out of history. That up until that time, and oftentimes history, recorded history, is the history of white, rich, powerful men. And almost anything else and everybody else doesn't get part of the historical record. And with that book and other things at the time, a revolution began to recount, to tell, to record the experience of American Jewish women, and that's one of the reasons why we're here today. It is the 100th anniversary of the bat mitzvah, and is 50 years anniversary since the ordination of the first woman rabbi. Success is a woven tapestry of passion, support, and historical circumstance. Passion I got, from the ether when I was born. But I was lucky to be born into a family where my mother and father never said no to my passion. As a matter of fact, they said, yes, go for it. And without that kind of acceptance, passion doesn't evolve. Support. It really matters who you marry. There is no way that I could have stepped onto any stage that I did if Ezra, who is in Israel right now, otherwise he'd be here. Oh, hi, Ezra. If Ezra did not provide an environment at home that made it stable and safe for me to come out, and I dare say the late night pillow talk that encouraged me when I was in dismay. Historical circumstance. When I was in my 20s, I cannot tell you how many women, 70, 75 years old, would be at an onig and grab my arm and would say, I would have been you had I could have been you. And those three things coming together provide the opportunity for me to be who I am. And lastly, life as a woman rabbi is very much like the story of the ugly duckling. You kind of walk around, and the other ducks are looking over there, and they say, she doesn't look like us. Does she quack? I don't know. Is she diving for fish? Boy, she's strange looking. And you walk around among ducklings thinking that maybe you're not worthy, taking in their ridicule, not being able to see yourself until one day you step to the edge of a pond and you look at your reflection and you see that you're not a duck at all, but rather a swan. And on that day that you see your reflection, the entire rest of your life becomes an unfolding into beauty. And so that's what my life has been, and when I look into your eyes, I see my reflection, and I'm so grateful to be in this congregation as I unfold into beauty and as you join me by looking at your reflection and also unfolding in beauty. I am so grateful that you are here right now, and I'm grateful for all of us that you are collecting our stories, not just the first generation, but all of us who have stepped onto the shores of the pond so that you can tell the story of a generation that yearns to be beautiful. Welcome.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Okay. How is that? Rabbi Kedar is much better to look at than Zola. But first of all, as I always like to say before I speak, I have a few things I'd like to say. And I want to begin by saying how wonderful it is to be back here in the northern suburbs, in particular at BJBE. I'm not sure many in the crowd or those of you who are listening from various parts of the world know that Steffi and I actually taught in religious school at BJBE. So right now I'm thinking about 43, 44 years ago, driving quite a distance from where we lived in Rogers Park, all the way out to Milwaukee Avenue, where the previous building was, and teaching on Monday nights in religious school. So this congregation, this community here is really a part of my life. Also, would be remiss if I didn't point out what is, I'm sure, obvious to everyone listening on Zoom and those of you who are here in person, that Rabbi Shapiro, Alav HaShalom, was a huge influence in my life. He presided, he officiated at my wedding 45 years ago, and to this day, I was saying to Ben, his brother, just a minute ago, he resides within me, and I feel very grateful and blessed to have had him and Hannah and the kids in our lives. Today, and thank you, Rabbi Kedar, very much for the wonderful things you just said, and especially what you said about Ezra. Ezra, hi. And to all of you who told me in Zoomland or wherever you're listening that you were going to be listening, please know I'm speaking just to you personally today. So thank you, really, Rabbi, for the beautiful things you said, and most specifically about what you said about Ezra, because I can certainly identify with that. It is not an exaggeration to say that there would be no purpose if Steffi weren't my bride for all these years. So today, I'm so honored to be a part of this remarkable period of time when the congregation is acknowledging and saluting and feting Rabbi Kedar as she transitions to Rabbi Emerita. And I know there are a whole series of things that are unfolding, and I was thrilled when the rabbi called me and asked me if I would do a little learning piece on the history of women in the Rabbinate. And I want to begin by pointing out that today we're already beginning to see a sort of periodization of women in the Rabbinate. You know, periodization is the way in which historians organize the past in order to convey it and to teach it. You know, for example, we talk about decades. You know, the decades of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. I'm sure some of you have watched CNN's various programs, and it's almost, you know, we don't stop to think that, you know, history doesn't really divide itself that way. I mean, things don't begin and end in 1960 and then 1970, you know, but historians have to do that in order to be able to organize the past. And we're starting to organize the past of women in the Rabbinate, because 50 years is not just the beginning anymore. It's things are underway. We have almost 1,000 women rabbis just in the liberal branches of Judaism today, and we're starting to see women in what's called the modern Orthodox community as well. And one way in which we periodize this whole process is when we talk about what in the Hebrew term is the Vatikot. The Vatikot are the pioneering, that's what it means, those who were the first, really. This year, of course, all the focus, or much of the focus, is on Rabbi Sally Priesand, who was ordained in 1972. But it's very much in keeping with Sally and her demeanor that she is pointing the light not so much at her, but at the others who quickly followed after her, who also were part of the unfolding of this dramatic change in spiritual leadership, not only in North America, but around the world. And this leads me to remind you that your own rabbi falls into that category. Now, over the years, as our future unfolds, you're going to meet many, many other women rabbis and many other pioneers in different ways. But the pathway that made this all begin to happen, really much of it was trod by what we call the Vatikot. And I know that Rabbi Kedar is a Vatika because there's barely anybody today that was not admitted to rabbinical school during the 16 years that I was the Dean of Admissions. I was the Dean of Admissions from the year of my ordination, which was 1982, until 1998 when I assumed the directorship of the American Jewish Archives. That's already 25 years ago. So this is 40 years ago. But in fact, Rabbi Kedar had already been admitted, and we spent some time in school overlapping because she's an ordinee of the class of 1985. So what I'm going to propose to do today, if I can succeed, is I want to share with you some of the stories about the road that led to the ordination of the first women rabbis, and to discern from that some lessons. And in doing so, I'm also want to interweave some of the lessons that I think we can learn from Rabbi Kedar, which I think is only appropriate since this is a time when we should be reflecting on her rabbinate and what it stood for. And this is, of course, like any hour-long talk, incomplete, but it will be a start. And the reason I say it will be a start is because in planning for this event, we decided to have a historian interview Rabbi Kedar. And that historian is a historian very highly respected in our movement, a woman by the name of Carol Balin. Dr. Balin was a professor on our New York campus for 20 years and was actually the first woman to receive tenure, faculty tenure on that campus. And so she sat with your rabbi for a good 40, 45 minutes and asked a variety of questions. I'm going to be showing you during my presentation just some excerpts from that interview. And that entire interview, along with many other things, will be preserved in the American Jewish Archives. And that will mean that Rabbi Kedar and her contributions as a Vatika will be available for future historians who will want to study her career and the career of those people who came to HUC and left starting in 1972 through the early 1980s. So with that said, I want to begin. Down in the lower middle is, here are the faces of rabbis, right? And it's hard to imagine that 50 years ago no one could have, really envisioned such a thing. And here is your rabbi who is going to be sort of featured in my presentation. Now, I wanted to begin, before I get into my history, I wanted to do something that I wanted to surprise Rabbi Kedar. I hope this will be a surprise to you. Rabbi, do you remember that in those early years, you had just been ordained and I wasn't much ahead of you? One of my first assignments was to make a recruitment video. That recruitment video was made to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the CCAR, 1989. And the purpose was to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Rabbinical Conference, but then it would have use afterwards. It would have legs. It would be used for recruitment. And I remember, because I was at the time Dean of Admissions, I remember making it, and there was a desire, even though there weren't as many as there are today, it was a desire to make sure we had women rabbis in that video. So here is Rabbi Kedar in 1989 speaking about her rabbi who influenced her when she was growing up, and what his career meant to her. It goes by very quickly. It's just one little excerpt.
Rabbi was Eugene Littman. And for Eugene Littman, the whole mission of being alive was social action, was social justice.
So that was your clip from that. That was your moment of fame in 1989. Now, we tend to begin the story of women in the Rabbinate by talking about Rabbi Prezan, but in fact, there's never been a time in the history of the Hebrew Union College when women were not in the classroom. You're looking at a building, a facility that no longer exists. It was torn down. It's the basement chapel of the Mound Street Temple that was located in Cincinnati, Ohio. This is the room, the very room where the very first classes in 1875 took place at HUC in October of 1875. And in that group, there were 12 or 13 students. The school, this fancy name, the college, was much more of a religious school than a college. But in that group, there was a woman, and her name was Julia Ettlinger. And Julia Ettlinger sat in that classroom and studied the sacred texts along with all the young boys. And we actually can prove that because you're looking at the grade book from 1875, and I've blown up for you the fact that you can see Julia got a 10 in Talmud, and that was the highest grade. You can see there's a few people who got 7s. That means you didn't do so well. And if you got a 10, that was the highest score. And Julia was probably 13 years old. Whatever happened to Julia? Well, we know what happened to Julia. Tragically, she never finished. She studied a year and then departed. And she caught spinal meningitis at the age of 20 and died. And so if you go to Cincinnati, there's a picture of Sally standing next to Julia's tombstone in the United Hebrew Cemetery in Cincinnati. Now, just to prove my point, you're looking now at a picture of a young woman by the name of Emily Block. Emily Block is the first woman to actually receive a diploma from Hebrew Union College, which occurred in the late 1880s. Now, you may say, wow, the school started in 1875. That's a long time, but you have to remember that the first rabbis who were ordained from HUC was 1883. The program was an 8-year program. So she is considered early, and when you see the lists, Isaac Wise used to compile to make the school seem bigger and more important than it really was in those early years. He would compile the list of graduates. Most of them were ordinees, but if you look at those early lists, he lists, in the 1890s, he lists Emily Block. When she was graduated, she did not receive ordination, but this is a close-up of her face. When she graduated, Isaac Wise published this in the year after her graduation. She received a master's degree, and this is from the American Israelite. That's Isaac Wise's paper, and you can read for yourself what he writes about Emily Block. Now, I have to confess, it's true, she was related to Isaac Wise, but he still says, as you can see, she's a graduate of Cincinnati University, which is across the street, and the Hebrew Union College, and she has a Master of Hebrew letters. So that's, in those days, remember, many people didn't go to high school in those days. So she was a highly educated woman, and she was just appointed, as you can see, to come to Chicago to teach at the School of the Chicago Israelites. And you see the last line, Wise says, she will do telling work in that school as she has done for a number of years in the Sabbath school of our congregation in Cincinnati. She's always quiet, dutiful, a thorough and successful teacher. Now, women began to call for the ordination of women very early on. And I do want to make a shout out to the women of Reform Judaism, or what used to be called sisterhoods, because the sisterhoods have been outstanding advocates for women. Sometimes I remind the students at Hebrew Union College that sisterhood is often very misunderstood, and especially when you think about the 1950s and 60s, people assume maybe sisterhood is concerned with kitchen matters and oneg Shabbat and things of that sort, whereas I think we underestimate the significance of sisterhood. You're looking at this beautiful woman. Her name is Carrie Simon. Carrie Simon was the founding national president of Sisterhood. Sisterhoods celebrated its 100th birthday in 2013. It was established, the national sisterhoods, in 1913. And she was a remarkable woman, married to a rabbi. The rabbi, his name was Abram Simon. She's a Cincinnatian, that is Carrie Simon. She grew up, and when her husband was in school, they met and fell in love, and she was a rabbi's wife for her entire career, but a very dynamic woman. After her presidency in NFTS, or Women of Reform Judaism, she began to advocate that women deserved to have a place on the boards of temples. You know, that was women. Believe it or not, there was a time when women could not even have membership to synagogues, only through their husbands. And so she advocated that women should be members of the board and be voting members. And she becomes the first woman at the Washington Hebrew congregation to be a voting member in 1923. It's so ironic. Her husband was ex officio, but she was a voting member. And she writes these words as president of NFTS, and she says, "Are there not Jewish young women in our land whose intensity of religious feeling is such, and whose mental outlook is broad enough to urge them to enter the ministry? Have we not women who are willing to concentrate their talents to the profession which is to the Jew the most exalted in the world? Of course, we will be told all the 101 objections which traditional Judaism will raise. But stimulating our women into this type of leadership will outweigh anything that can be offered to the contrary." This is literally 100 years ago. And I won't be speaking about this today, but suffice it to say that the actual lead into the first ordination of a woman at HUC owes a great deal to the advocacy of Women of Reform Judaism in the 1950s and 60s. Now, let's talk about some of these pioneering people. You're looking at a very famous name. Even if you've never heard of her, she may be one of the most famous women who beat the path to ordination. And that is Ray Frank, who's known, as you can see, as the Golden Rabbi, girl rabbi of the girl rabbi of the Golden West. Ray Frank is a fascinating woman. She was raised in Oakland, California, and initially became a teacher. And then she landed for herself a job as a journalist. And in the year 1890, she grew up, by the way, at a Reform congregation, Temple Emmanuel in San Francisco. And in 1890, she takes this journalistic job, and she's assigned to cover a story that's taking place in Spokane, Washington. So she heads for Spokane, Washington, and she lands there right just before the High Holy Days. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, she lands in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And as Yom Kippur is approaching, she's looking for the congregation where she'd like to join the community in prayer, and she's informed that there'll be no services for Yom Kippur because the Jews, I know this is very difficult to believe, but it did happen, the Jews were arguing with each other. And they're arguing with each other because there's a group that wants to hold to very rigid traditional practice of Judaism, and then there's a group that wants to modernize. And these two groups cannot get together, and therefore they decide they won't have services at all. Now, there's a part of this story that I can't answer for you. I have no answer for it. It makes no sense to me, but apparently Ray Frank says, look, if people will come to services, I'll lead the service and I'll speak. And they accept this offer. It doesn't make sense, right? Because if they were, and she herself, you'll see, they're arguing with each other over tradition versus modernism, and yet they accept her. They accept her offer. So she delivers High Holy Day services. She leads High Holy Day services, and she speaks. I'm going to show you some of the words she says on this occasion. They were published in the newspaper. We believe that Ray Frank is the first woman to actually occupy the pulpit in America and to deliver a worship service and a sermon at the same time. As far as I know, no one preceded her. This is in the year 1890. Now, this is what she says on this occasion. It was later published in a newspaper called the American Hebrew. She says this is on Yom Kippur, she says, religion is not compulsory. God wants not grudgingly that which you give. Keep it. You cannot be poorer than you are. Whatever you do for religion, or whatever you give, must be voluntary and sincere. Coming here because your neighbor does is not religion. Neither is it religion to give a certain amount because someone else has done the same. True religion is true repentance for our many sins and mistakes. In her last paragraph, I mean, this is, you see how long it is. I've highlighted just two little paragraphs, but the last paragraph of the address is, friends, I thank you for the patience with which you have listened to me. And in the name of all we Hebrews hold dear, I ask you to be patient with each other. Drop all your personal feeling in this matter. She's talking about their conflict. And meet each other halfway over your differences. Give each other a hearty handshake for the sake of the cause. And I prophesy, heaven will crown your efforts with peace and prosperity from tonight on. Resolve to be something. It's amazing, huh? She had a whole decade-long career of speaking and preaching. She was interviewed in newspapers. Jewish correspondent asks her at one point what she would do if she was a rabbi. She says she has no intention of becoming a rabbi. I'm not sure that that was true because in 1893 she spent a semester studying at the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. And then she decided, for whatever reason, she wanted to stay on the road and lecture and teach, and she continued that until she met her husband. But at some point she's asked, what would you do if you were a rabbi? And I loved her answer, so I wanted to share it with you. I'm just, again, you see I'm excerpting from a long article that she answered the correspondent. She says, if I were a rabbi, I would not refuse any man a ticket for heaven. If I were a rabbi, I would not frequent such public places as street corners, cigar stands, nor business houses until I was conspicuous only when absent. I would not, were I a rabbi, canvass the town for tickets for a party if the funds went toward my own high salary, I would prefer less salary and have no soliciting to do. And if I were a rabbi, I would not direct my sermon to the costliest sealskin, handsomest bonnet, and smallest brain. But I divide my attention as well as my remarks among my audience. If I had a Sabbath school, this is the coup de grace. If I had a Sabbath school, I would so conduct it that each boy and girl would see in my conduct that which I preached in my sermons. Well, in 1901, she falls in love with an economist, and she ends up marrying this economist. He serves on the faculty of the University of Illinois for the rest of his career. I always am so saddened when I think about this, because this is the Franks I'm blocking right now on his last name, but she retained her name. She died in 1948, and so, she could have been interviewed, she could have been recorded. There were all sorts of things that no one bothered to do, and thankfully, her husband survived her, and her husband was so loyal to her that he wrote a great deal and collected her letters. And I wish I could tell you they were in the American Jewish Archives. They're not. They're in the American Jewish Historical Society. But thank goodness we have them. Rabbi Kedar and I heard a story about Martha Neumark. Martha Neumark is, she was featured at the Central Conference of American Rabbis conference that we just attended together. And Martha Neumark is the daughter of an HUC professor. And she is distinguished in being the first woman to actually complete the rabbinical curriculum, the entire curriculum at HUC, and request ordination. And this is in the year 1920. And in the end, of course, she was turned away and given a degree in Sabbath school education. She did not succeed. But the fact that she came so close, as you can see in 1920, there were many newspapers that carried the story about Martha Neumark. Her father, Rabbi David Neumark, Professor David Neumark, was the philosophy professor at the Cincinnati School. And you can see that her interest in becoming a rabbi caught not only secular paper, but Jewish papers. I'll show you. See, Miss Martha Neumark of Cincinnati has the distinction of being the only woman in the United States to study to be a rabbi. And when she completes the course at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, she will be the only woman rabbi in the country. This is 1920, but unfortunately, although the faculty of the Hebrew Union College voted to ordain her, and the rabbis, the alumni in the CCAR voted to ordain her, the Board of Governors of the Hebrew Union College decided not to listen to the will of the people, and therefore she was refused ordination and didn't receive it. And she lived long enough to see Rabbi Prezend ordained. And she wrote Rabbi Prezend a beautiful note just before she passed away. Here's another. This is, of course, from the Jewish Sentinel. I brought that along because everybody, I think, remembers. Do we still have the Sentinel, don't we, in Chicago, the Jewish paper? No, it's out of business now? Well, that was our paper for a long time, the Sentinel. As you see, the American Jewish Weekly in Chicago. So you see she was in that journal as well. Now, here's a fascinating story. Rabbi Kedar and I were talking about it. Actually, Rabbi Prezend was not the very first woman to be ordained a rabbi. She is the first woman in North America to be ordained a rabbi, Sally is, and the first woman to be ordained by by a faculty of a seminary. But the first woman that was ordained is this woman, Fräulein Rabbiner Regina Jonas. Remarkable, remarkable woman who is really a great heroine and was almost lost to history. So here's her story. She was a very young woman raised in an Orthodox family. And she and her father were very close, and they went to synagogue together all the time when she was a little girl. Her father died when she was only 10, and this was a terrible blow to her. And the rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi, took a keen interest in her and sort of became, if you will, a surrogate parent to her while she was growing up. And this drew her into the synagogue, the Orthodox synagogue, and she became an extremely devout and pious young woman who was determined to carry on the wonderful work that this rabbi had committed to her. And so she decides she's going to become a rabbi, and she studies at the liberal seminary, the Hochschule für das Wissenschaft des Judentum in Berlin. And she studies there from about 1925 to 1930. She completes her entire program. She writes her thesis on, is it possible halachically for a woman to be a rabbi? And she is not ordained. Just as the same thing that happens with Martha Neumark, she's not ordained. And they give her a degree to be a teacher. Now, 5 years later, in 1935, Hitler has now begun to decimate the German Jewish community, and German Jewish community is in want of rabbinic leadership. Many rabbis were leaving, along with many Jews. And it's at this time that 3 rabbis independently ordain Rabbi Jonas. And this is a picture of her that survived the war. And I'm going to show you something that's so touching. I'm going to turn the picture over now. And this is the back of the picture. And this is her handwriting. She dates the picture of 36. And she writes these words in Hebrew. I have no idea why she wrote them, but this is what's on the back of the card. If you read Hebrew, you can see she writes, Eheyeh asher eheyeh, which in Hebrew means, it's a famous line that comes from God. God speaks these words, I am what I am, or even more appropriately, because it's in future tense, I will be that which I will be. Now, in 1941, she's taken to Terezin. And in Terezin, she continues to teach and to serve and to lead. This is from the Terezin archives, this paper. And I've translated a little of it for you. You see, it says, this is a lecture given by the only woman rabbi. So she was ministering to people and caring for people in that period of time. And then in 1944, she and her mother are deported from Terezin and taken to Auschwitz, where she perishes. In 1939, the granddaughter of one of the most distinguished Orthodox rabbis and the daughter of a very distinguished conservative rabbi, Rabbi Israel Leventhal, Hadassah Leventhal, enrolls in the Jewish Institute of Religion. And again, she completes the entire program in 1939, and she's given a teacher's certificate. She cannot be ordained. So she devotes herself most of her career to teaching and lecturing. This is a brochure we have at the American Jewish Archives on her, where she lists the lists of subjects that she can teach on, and people who've heard her speak, and what she has to offer. When I didn't have time to bring this to you, but when Rabbi Prezand is ordained in 1972, several rabbis who still were alive from her class petitioned the college and asked the college to ordain her. And the college doesn't do so. But she lives long enough, just like Martha Neumark, to see Sally ordained. This is a fabulous story. This is the wife of a rabbi, Paula Ackerman, and in the 1950s, her husband dies in Meridian, Mississippi. She and her husband had been in that community for about 18 years, and the community asks the rabbi's wife if she will serve as the rabbi. And so she accepts the responsibility, and that causes a bitter outcry. This is a letter from 1951 from the president of the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, and he says, Rabbi Eisendrath, president of the UAHC, today denied the report that his organization had given approval to the appointment of Mrs. William Ackerman as the spiritual leader of Beth Israel congregation to replace her husband, the late Rabbi William Ackerman. While approving in principle the right of women to serve in the Rabbinate, Dr. Eisendrath, leader of the central body of Reform Judaism, representing more than 425 congregations throughout the United States and Canada, declared that to his knowledge, Mrs. Ackerman did not possess the qualifications of a rabbi. To qualify for the Rabbinate, Dr. Eisendrath said, one must receive ordination in the United States, generally bestowed by one or another of the Jewish theological colleges upon the completion of a long and intensive course of specialized rabbinical instruction and training. So here she continues to serve. She functions as a rabbi. I've got pictures in the archives of her officiating at weddings and at funerals. And she later goes on and serves a different congregation. She dies in the 1980s. But again, she is a predecessor to this woman, Rabbi Sally Prezand. You're looking at one of the earliest pictures of Rabbi Prezand on the campus of the Hebrew Union College. And of course, I'm going to circle the most important thing about this picture is right there. She's in front of the American Jewish Archives. So that's where she was standing. And I want to just point out some of the wonderful documents that Rabbi Prezand has given to the American Jewish Archives, and we are going to have, thankfully, a lot of what Rabbi Kedar has accomplished at the AJA now. This is the letter in 1963, as you can see, that she is admitted to the Hebrew Union College, but as you see, not to the rabbinical program. That is actually emphasized here. She's admitted to the school, but it says women are welcome in any of our courses, and we would be glad to discuss with you the various programs in which you might be interested. Since you state in your letter that your interest leans specifically to the Rabbinate, we would have to inform you candidly that we do not know what opportunities are available for women in the Rabbinate, since we have, as yet, not ordained any women. Most women prefer to enter the field of Jewish religious education. That's because the women who studied along the way were never given ordination, and they were forced to settle for what was in that less than what they themselves wanted to achieve. Then Sally, in 1964, is officially admitted to the pre-rabbinic program, which was an amazing achievement. And this moment marks a road that will lead to ordination, because now for the first time they have used the word pre-rabbinic. Now, it's still a long time. There's still 8 years that she's going to have to, proceed, but this is a historic document. Now, in 68, she is finally finished her undergraduate degrees at the University of Cincinnati, and I am pleased to inform you that you have been admitted to the rabbinic school. And this all happens without a vote, without any decision made by any body, meaning body or organization. But what I've shown you up to this point is, in fact, it is a long and difficult process with many pioneers who contributed to make this moment just happen, and it goes by almost unnoticed. Now, one of the reasons why I want to preserve this material is because even though we all know that we are far from perfect today in terms of gender equality, we know that for many women in our field as well as in many other fields, they do not have pay equity. We also have been made painfully aware in our current movement, the current state of our movement, that the kind of behavior which makes all of us shudder still goes on, and we know that. But it is very important to help students today understand what careers like Rabbi Kedar's has meant to them. And there's no way that someone who was born 25 years ago, those are the students that I have now, who can possibly appreciate what it was like to be a rabbi 50 years ago. And I'm going to show you right now proof of that. So Sally is ordained in 1972. That's the famous ordination picture. In 1975, 3 years later, the Hebrew Union College is celebrating the 100th anniversary of its founding. And there's a big rabbinical conference in Cincinnati. And they decide to have a seminar for all the rabbis on the future of the Rabbinate. And they invite 5 speakers to address the topic. And the youngest speaker is Rabbi Sally Prezan. Now, Sally subsequently told me, when I started teaching this, I taught it for many years, and only later did I learn, she told me that before she was introduced to speak, she was the last speaker, they began to close the program up. Meaning, not deliberately, but that she was so invisible that the moderator was saying, well, we want to thank all of our speakers, and then the people on the podium had to say, Rabbi Prezan hasn't spoken yet. You have to put what you're about to hear in that context. These are her words. There's already now 2 other women rabbis in America, Rabbi Sandy Sasso, who was ordained in 74 from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, and in 1975, a second woman was ordained at the New York campus of HUC. She gets up in front of what was surely a room filled with just men, and here's just a little excerpt from what she says.
The Rabbinate has always been an exclusive, elite male club. When I was ordained 3 years ago, I had reason to believe that basic religious equality, granted to women at least on paper since the early days of our movement, was at last to become a reality. I have questioned that assumption many times in recent months. My questioning occurs when I venture outside of my own synagogue, particularly when I come to conventions such as this. Sunday night, I heard one of our speakers refer to rabbis as sons of Israel, and I shuddered. Yesterday, I was present when the list of our new members was read. One name among them belonged to the second woman ordained by our movement, and yet our speaker began the list of names by saying, "The following men have been elected to membership." This morning I worshiped at the college chapel and prayed along with you that the perpetual light might cast its radiance into the lives of all men, that our sons might be taught by the Lord, and that he who blessed our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, might also bless those who faithfully devote themselves to the community together with all of their brothers. I would like to believe that you do not intentionally deny my existence as a rabbi and as a woman, but sometimes you make that very difficult for me.
Now, if that doesn't get you, this is Rabbi Sandy Sasso, who was the second woman who was ordained, has had a brilliant career in Indianapolis, the first woman to be married to a rabbi, the first husband and wife rabbinic team. And this is Rabbi Sandy Sasso just as she was beginning her studies. Today, among the many things she's accomplished, Rabbi Sasso has written a whole array of children's books, juvenile books on women heroines. And so she has a book out on Regina Jonas, about whom I just spoke. And Rabbi Kedar talked about how this is the 100th anniversary of Judith Kaplan having a bat mitzvah in America, and she's written about that. A children's book, and was just announced, I mean, I know about this, the AJ is one of the sponsors. A brand new book is out on Sally, on Rabbi Prezant, a juvenile book, so that young women, young girls, will be able to read these books. I know you're not going to believe this, but that's why we have documents. This is a letter when she was a student at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. Just a year into the program, or a year or two into the program, they did an article on her in the New York Times, Sandy Sasso. And she received this letter, which is part of her records at the American Jewish Archives. And I won't read the whole letter. I'm just going to read the bottom line, because the whole letter is summed up in the bottom line. But this is a woman writing, and the woman is appalled that this young woman wants to become a rabbi. And after a very condescending letter, she concludes with this paragraph. Ordinarily, I would sign off by wishing you much success. This is a grown woman talking to probably a 22 or 23-year-old. But this time, I will refrain. In fact, frankly, I hope you don't make it, for your sake, mine, and everyone else's. Now, this is, of course, foreign to us and to our ears, but this is so important that we preserve this and we remind people, even though you heard me say, we're not in nirvana yet, but we have made progress. And the vatikot, like your own rabbi, are part of the road that has brought us to where we are today. And I want to prove that point, and by concluding with a few of the clips that future historians will study when they decide to write about the career of Rabbi Kedar. What would Rabbi Kedar say about these very issues about which I've been talking? Well, they'll hear these words.
I wanted to know what rabbis knew. I knew that they knew something very important, and I wanted to know what rabbis knew. It wasn't that I wanted to be a rabbi because I was a feminist. I wanted to be a rabbi for the highest reasons, for the knowledge of it, for the importance of it, for the love of it. And then feminist came, Zionism came, still keeps me in the game. That sort of quest to the mystery and to the transcendence and to the beauty and to the grandeur of life continues to be the motivating factor for me.
I think there are so many important parts of Rabbi Kedar's career. You know, the fact that she begins her career in Jerusalem and is really a pioneering figure at that time, the first woman. Now again, just as I was pointing out, there's so many women have been ordained by our Jerusalem campus, but when she was first ordained, there weren't such examples. And so Rabbi Kedar went to Jerusalem and was an associate rabbi, assistant rabbi, and then led the Reform congregation in Jerusalem, and served in our movement there in numerous ways. Her role in terms of administrative leadership in this region when she directed the Union Regional Office before she assumed her pulpit here. Perhaps one of the most important contributions she'll have made is in her many writings and her interest in spiritual work. The writings not only that published for the general community, but published for the Central Conference of American Rabbis, like the Counting of the Omer. Let's hear what she says about this.
Right. If you're successful even just a little bit, you penetrate the spiritual reality of another person. And people say, oh, I had no idea you knew how I was feeling, or that other people felt the way that I did. So it enabled me to have an interpersonal relationship with people that wasn't conversationally based, wasn't a dialogue. It was me, the paper, and your brain and heart and spirit.
Of course, this congregation will be a big part of her legacy as well. And how it develops will carry forward in the years ahead her teachings and her contributions to the life of the congregation. Just like there's aspects to this congregation that Rabbi Shapiro invested in it and that are a part of it, even if it can't always be identified as years go on. The entire trajectory will be shaped here by her teachings and her influence.
Motivating factor of all the things I've done is to connect myself and then be a conduit to things that are essential, important, that can bring meaning and purpose and expanse to the world. I want to live there. And for me, that was Israel. For me, that was the Rabbinate. For me, that as I wandered through the different jobs that I was doing, my work, the job was a dime a dozen. Job is what you get paid to do. But my work is what God gives you to do in this world. Always loyal to the work. And that is reaching for the ineffable and trying to catch it and throw it back at people and saying, here, look what I found. It sparkles. It glistens. Let's live in this.
And of course, the last question that Rabbi Balin posed to Rabbi Kedar was something along the lines that, all important personalities are asked, what's your legacy going to be? And I'll let her answer that herself.
We're all first at something. And I just really felt it was important to start recording those things. Not just the first, but many firsts. I don't think we're in control of our legacy. I kind of think our legacy is none of our business. It's the story others decide to tell, right or wrong. It belongs to the people who tell it. The only thing I can do is walk through this world with as much integrity, curiosity, aspiration, a sense of service. The end of my days, people will judge me, and I hope they judge me kindly. I actually don't think my legacy is for me to tell. I did the best I could.
Well, friends, when I travel around, the first thing I say when I assume a pulpit, I usually begin this way, but I've deliberately decided to end this way. The first thing I say is that the most challenging, the most demanding, the most onerous, and the most important and significant task in the rabbinate is the congregational rabbi. It's always easy for someone like myself to come into a place to talk about a subject that I write about and I study, and I've had the good fortune actually, to sit on top of the world's greatest collection of documentary evidence on all of this. For heaven's sakes, I don't even have to go looking for it myself. I can ask assistants to bring it to my desk. But I come and I go. The most important job is the rabbis who are with people. They can't every week do a reworking of their lectures. They have to, every week, every year, they have to think and create anew. They have to be there at very happy times. They have to be there at very sad times. They have to transition from one family that's on one end of the scale to another family that's on a different end of the scale. The array of demands is endless. And at a time like this, when we are thinking about and reflecting on Rabbi Kedar's contributions, I want to just conclude by saying I'm confident, Rabbi, that when people study the materials that will be on you at the American Jewish Archives, that they will certainly know you did your best, and they will certainly judge you kindly and very complimentary, because your career has been really a tribute to the vision of those women who worked so hard for so many years to beat a path that made it possible for us to be in the good fortune of having leaders, teachers, and exemplars like you and so many of my colleagues. All I can say is that I've been inspired by your career. I've been inspired by your writings, and I know that I join with all of those who love you in wishing you continuing success. We know that you will go from strength to strength. Thank you all for your nice attention.